Okay, Tov. Today's daf yomi is Bava Basra Pei, Bava Basra 80. Today's daf is dedicated for a shmir for the Chayalim. That's all for the Shuyim. Yeshua for Am Yisrael, this Eis Tzara, says our Mishnah, Okeach Peros Shovach Mechavero, that somebody who purchases a Shovach, but he doesn't purchase the Shovach, he doesn't just purchase the dovecoat, he purchases the Peros of the Shovach. He purchases the offspring of that dovecoat, the fruits of that dovecoat from his friend. Rashbam explains that what this refers to is that the doves produce a pair of birds. If you have a pair of doves that are mating and they're living in this dovecoat, then the female is going to give birth to 11 pairs of doves over the course of the 12 months. And each one will be a male and a female. So you purchase the brood that the dove produces, then mafriach brei charishona. You have to leave behind. You can't take, even though you purchased all the brood. The assumption is that you have not purchased the first pair that it's born, because if you take away the first two babies, then the mother dove will be upset and she'll leave the dovecote. She has to have some companionship with her. So too, if you purchase peros caveris, the fruits of the beehive, i.e., the swarms of bees, and notel gimel nechilam, then you only take 3 swarms. The bees will produce a new swarm of bees, new baby bees, as long as they keep being moved. So if you produce, so the first 3 swarms that are made are all that you could take, umisaris, and then the owner of the beehive is able to, well, the Gemara is going to discuss what word Masaris means, but the assumption is he's able to stop them from reproducing, to say, okay, all you get are three swarms of bees, 3 litters of bees, the rest belong to me. Then I can stop them. Chalos tvash, let's say you were going to purchase the honeycombs that are in the beehive. You're purchasing the honey of the beehive. Meniach beis chalos, then you have to leave behind 2 honeycombs, because otherwise the bees you'll destroy the whole beehive. So you can get all the honey except for the 2 honeycombs. Zeisim lakutz, let's say you get olive wood to cut down. Meniach straight grufios, you have to leave behind 2 of the branches so that the tree can regenerate. So the Gemara first asked the question, how can our Mishnah say you leave behind the first pair of doves that are born? But we have a brisa that says brecha rishona ushnia. You leave behind the first and the second. So why is it saying our Mishnah just the first when the brisa says the first and the second? Amarav kahana lo kasha hala hala ima. So says Rav Kahana, it's not difficult. The second one is that's the offspring of the first offspring of the mother dove, meaning to say the second offspring are the grandchildren of the mother dove that are born to the first pair of doves. So if you take away the first pair of doves, then the matriarch of the nest will run away. And if you take away the second pair of doves that are born to the first pair, then what would happen is the first pair itself would run away because she doesn't have her children. And then if she runs away, her mother will run away. So therefore, you have to leave both. Hala, hala, ima. So the Gemara asked the question. Hold on one second. Indeed, the position of Tosfos is that, in fact, you have to leave the first pair of every brood that's brought. That's the position of Tosfos. We'll look at that Tosfos in a second. So the Gemara says, so that's why you have to leave both. So the Gemara asks the question. Ma'ishna ima dimitztavasa abarta vazuga tishafkina la. Why is the mother different? That since why do we have to leave behind the first pair of doves for the mother? Because she has companionship with her daughter and with her mate. And so therefore we leave behind the first pair for her. Well, what about this, the daughter of the matriarch? Let her have companionship with her mother and her mate. So therefore, why do we need to leave an offspring for the first pair? Why don't we just say let the first pair get her companionship from her mother? So the Gemara explains, Ima Barta Mitzdavta. The mother gets companionship from her daughter. Barta Ima lo Mitzdavta. The daughter doesn't get the companionship from her mother. Meaning to say, the mother will be too depressed if her daughter is no longer there. But the daughter herself won't be comforted by the fact that her mother's there. She needs her own daughter to be there. The mother always looks for the daughter. So that's the message of that's the message of the teaching. I was thinking that this is a metaphor for our relationship with God, that God is like our parent, our mother, our father, and God loves us more than we love God. But God is always looking to be with us for this companionship. So again, what we said was, Tosfos says that this is the same law for all the broods, that you always have to leave back the first pair, because otherwise they'll go away. So, however, Rashbam disagrees. Rashbam says, no, only for the first pair you have to leave its daughter, but not for the second, because since once there's a lot of chevra already in the group, meaning to say there's a mother, a granddaughter, and then she's going to have her own chevra with her, and she will not need to keep her own daughter there. But Tosfos disagrees. So now we go to the next piece. The piece is Peros Kaveras Noto Gimel Nachilon Masaris. That if you have so if you have the swarms from the beehive, you take the three swarms, and then you're able to be masaris, meaning the owner could stop the bees from producing, because when the bees are producing, they're not making honey. And so therefore, the owner of the beehive wants the bees to make the honey. So if he says, I'm selling you the bees, the offspring of the bees, he's really only committing to selling the first three swarms. So the first Gemara says, well, how does he stop them? How does he stop the bees from reproducing? So Amar Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Bechardo. He gives them some mustard. That's what he gives them to eat. And now he drops some mustard seeds. So Amri b'Marava Mishmei Rabbi Yosef B'Chanano Barchanina lo chardo masar. So the mustard is not what stops them from eating. El mitoch shepian chad, but it's only because their mouth gets very bitter from the mustard. And they're going to go back and want to eat a lot of honey. And because they're eating a lot of honey, they're going to be busy with the honey. They're not going to be busy with the mating. Rabbi Yochanan gives a different explanation of what masaris means. He says, no toshlosha nechilin besirus. He says you give the first three swarms, but you skip each time. Sirus from the word with dilug, to skip. Meaning to say that you give the guy who bought the swarms the first swarm, the third, and the fifth swarm. And the owner of the bees keeps the others, because each swarm is weaker than the previous one. Masnisa Tana, we learned in the Brayso, Noto Gimel Nachilin B'Zachar Zeh, that the person who purchases the swarms, he gets the first one. After that, they switch off. Okay, so now we go on to the honeycombs. We said if you sell the honey from the beehive, you're selling really you have to leave behind the two honeycombs to stay in the beehive, and all the other honey goes to the person who purchased it. We're going to start by giving us a general law about honey, and Gemara is going to set a price so that we actually had 25 days ago, which you might remember. It says Rav Kahana Dvash. So Rav Kahana starts by teaching us a chiddush about honey. Dvash b'kaveras inu yotzei midei machol v'olam. That honey in the beehive is always going to be considered to be is always going to be considered like it's food item. So let's look at what Rashbam says. Rashbam gives two explanations. First explanation is that even while it's in the beehive, then it's still going to be considered food. Why do we care if it's food? Well, first he explains, even though there are times that the bees are still eating their honey, nevertheless, it's still considered food unless he specifically says this is the bee food. Meaning to say, why do we care that it's food? Because the food is able to contract tumah. And so therefore, even though the bee is in the beehive and the bees are eating it, nevertheless, it's considered food. That's the first explanation. Or the second explanation is of Rashbam, only while it's in the beehive is it food, but once it flows out, it's considered not food but liquid, unless he specifically calculates in his mind that it's for food. So those are the two explanations. We'll just go along with the first one for now. That when it's in the beehive, it's food, even though the bees are eating from it. Alma kasaver. So we see from here that he's of the position. Rav Kahana is of the position. Lo bai machshava. We see from here that Rav Kahana is of the position that in order for something to be considered food, you don't have to consider it to be food. Meaning to say, on its own, it has the law of food. You haven't touched this beehive. You haven't touched the honey in there. You haven't said, "Oh, I'm going to eat this for my challah on Rosh Hashanah." But right away, it's automatically food without him thinking anything. So the Gemara challenges this from a brayso. Meisveit bash bekaveres eino lo ochav lo mashke. It says specifically the honey in the beehive is not food and it's not liquid. So now we have a direct contradiction. Rav Kahana says the honey in the beehive, even without thinking about it, is considered food. And here we have a source that says the honey in the beehive is not food and not liquid. So how do we do it? How do we deal with this? Two approaches. Abaye and Rava. And the Gemara is going to try to challenge them after this. Amar Abaye, Abaye says, okay, yeah. What is not considered food? Those two honeycombs, because those two honeycombs you have to leave back for the bees. So therefore, it's not considered to be your human food. So Rav Kahana is referring to the rest of the honey, and the Bryce is referring to the honeycombs. Rava says, Rava Amar Rabbi Eliezer. Rava says, no, this brisa is the position of Rabbi Eliezer. And now this is the brisa which we had. This is the Mishnah which we had cited earlier. Meaning to say, Rava says, I will just say it outside first. Remember, Rabbi Eliezer says that the honey beehive is considered like it's attached to the ground. And so therefore, this brisa considers the honey not to be food. And Rav Kahana is saying not like this. This basically is not saying like this brisa, because this brisa is the minority position of Rabbi Eliezer, who says the honey is always attached to the ground. So Rava Amar Rabbi Eliezer, he did not, because we're going to the Mishnah in Shavuos. Kaveris Devorim, the beehive, Rabbi Eliezer Amar Harei Kikarka. Rabbi Eliezer says it's like the ground. Therefore, since it's like the ground, we saw since something is real estate, in order to be able to write the pruzbol to protect your sabbatical loans, it has to be given to a person who owns real estate, because then it's like you gave a collateral, and it's like you already started collecting. This is Rashbam gave two answers on the top of the Gemara on 66a, and also. The Eina Mekabelas Tumah, since the bee is in the beehive, it does not contract Tumah, it's attached to the ground. The Mekoma, Harodu Meh, B'Shabbos, Chayav Chatas. If you try to take the honey out of the bees on Shabbos, you're liable for a sin offering. The Chachamim disagree. They say it's not attached to the beehive. So therefore, it's not attached to the ground. So you can't write the pruzbol. The Eina Tekarka. It's not like real estate. Mekabelas Tumah. It's able to contract the Tumah B'Mekoma, Harodu Meh, B'Shabbos Pater. And therefore you're exempt. So Rav Kahana, where he says the honey in the beehive is automatically considered like food. Now we have a brisa that contradicts it, that says that the honey in the beehive is not food and it's not liquid. So how do we deal with that contradiction? So Abaye's answer is that brisa is referring to the two honeycombs that are left back, and Rava's answer is that brisa is referring to the position of Rabbi Eliezer, who says that honey is in the beehive is considered like it's attached to the ground. So the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Lazar. First, we have the sugya which we had earlier. Rabbi Lazar ben Padas says, My time the Rabbi Eliezer. What's the reason why Rabbi Eliezer says that the honey is considered like it's attached to the ground? Well, it's in the beehive because it says in the book of Samuel, it says that when Jonathan was out in the battle with his arms bearer, he took his staff after he had not eaten the whole day and he dipped it in basically Yaros Tvash. But Yaros literally means a forest, so a forest of honey doesn't make sense. What does a forest have to do with honey? To tell you, it's just like a forest. If you take it from it on Shabbos, you're liable for a sin offering. So too, honey, you're liable. So this is the explanation for Rabbi Eliezer why honey in the beehive is considered like it's attached to the ground. So the Gemara says, let's challenge Rav Kahana. Again, what's Rav Kahana's position? That the honey in the beehive is automatically considered food, even without you specifically designating it as food. So the Gemara challenges this from the following source. Tvash hasav mikavaraso. Once the honey flows out of the beehive, that the honey that flows out of the beehive is not going to be considered to be like food or liquid, and therefore it's not going to contract tumah. So the Gemara says, how are we going to explain this brisa according to Rav Kahana? Because Rav Kahana says it's automatically considered food. So we have this problem. So Bishlamo Abaye can give a very simple answer. That's referring to the honey that flows out of the two honeycombs. El Rava, according to Rava, who says that Rav Kahana always considers everything food. So therefore, if that's the case, how would Rava explain this? So Rava kasha. So according to Rava, it's difficult. So Amarav Zvid could go and shezav al gabe klimos. No, Rava would say that this price is referring to where the honey flowed onto a disgusting item, and so therefore it's clearly not going to be food because it's flowing onto something that's obviously not edible. Ravacha Bar Yaakov says a similar answer. Amar Kigon Shazav Gabe Kashkashin, or he says that it flowed onto kaskasin, it flowed onto like little pieces of wood, so the honey is not going to be able to be eaten. Another challenge to Rav Kahana. Again, what was Rav Kahana's position? That the food in the beehive is automatically considered food. But we have a brisa that says, Tvash b'kivaraso, eino lo ochel v'lamashka. The brisa says specifically that the honey in the beehive is not going to be considered Tvash b'kivaraso, eino lo ochel v'lamashka. That the honey in the beehive is not food or not liquid. But if he decides to consider it food, he says, I'm designating it as food, metamis tumas ochan, and then it'll consider it to be like tumas ochan, and lamashkin, if he considers it to be liquid, metami tumas mashkin. There's a slight difference. There are some differences between a food item if it's considered food and it's considered liquid to be the amount in which it is able to transmit tumah. So therefore it depends what he considers it to be at that point. But anyway, we see from here whether it's the size of an egg or a revius. But the point is, how are we going to explain this brisa? Because it says the food item is not food unless he considers it food. Whereas Rav Kahana says, even without him considering it to be food, it's considered to be food. So according to Abaye, it's very easy. Abaye says this refers to the two honeycombs, which have to be left behind for the bees. According to Rava, who says that all the honey is considered like it's attached to the ground, according to Rabbi Eliezer, and Rava is speaking according to the Rabbanan, then why do we say, according to this, that it's not considered food unless he thinks about it as food? So Rava Kasha, Rava Taratachi. So Rava says, I'll tell you how to explain it. Chishev alav la'achila eno metame tumas ochen l'mashkin. Tumas ochen and l'mashkin eno metame tumas mashkin. So basically, Rava says, Rava basically says we have to change the whole girsa, meaning to say, even if he even if he considered it to be food, it's still not going to be considered the tumas ochin. And even if he considered it a liquid, it's not metame tumas mashkin. Meaning to say, we're saying that this position is going to say, like Rabbi Eliezer says, it's attached to the ground, and therefore even if he considered it food, it's not food. Even if he considered it liquid, it's not liquid. So basically change the girsa and say it's only going according to the shita of Rabbi Eliezer. So the Gemara says, Tanya Kavasi to Rav Kahana. Indeed, we have a brayz like Rav Kahana. Dvash b'Gemara metame tumas ochin shelo b'machshav. Exactly, we have a brayza. So, because otherwise we have all the sources and no brayza supporting Rav Kahana. So I say, actually, we do have a brayza supporting Rav Kahana. It says the honey in the beehive is considered food, and so it's metame right away, even without making any specific thought to designate it as food. So we say zeitim wakutz meniach shtei grupios. If you have the olives, and you're going to cut down the olive wood, you leave behind two grupios, two pieces of wood, two branches, so that the olive tree can regenerate. Tanara Abanan halokeach ilan michavero lakutz. So the Brisa teaches, let's say you purchase a tree from your friend, but that's just you're going to get some of the wood. You have the right to cut down some of the wood from the tree. Magbia min akarka tefach. The kotzitz, you have to, when you start to cut, you can only cut a handbreadth off of the ground, so that's going to allow it to regenerate. But if you cut it lower, then you're destroying the tree, and that's clearly not the intent. Besulas hashikma, let's say it's a sycamore that was one that was never cut, you have to leave it gimel tefachim, 3 tefachim off the ground before you cut it, so that'll allow it to regenerate. Sadin hashikma, if it's an older sycamore based tefachim, 2 tefachim off the ground will allow it to regenerate. Pekinim u'begafanim, these are like types of bamboos and grapevines, minapakaku and mala. They had a knot on the grapevine and on the bamboo, and from that point up you can cut. But they call mubarazim. But if it's palm trees and the cedar trees, chofer masharish, you can completely dig around them and uproot them with fisha ink is a machlif, because they're not going to grow back anyway, so you can anyways uproot them when you cut them down. So the Gemara asks the question, by the sycamore, is it 3 tefachim that we require? There are many. We have a contradictory source. In kotetzim besulas hashikma b'shviyas. We're not allowed to cut down the sycamore tree that's never been cut in the sabbatical year. That's considered like work for the sabbatical year. You're like pruning it. And Rabbi Yehuda Omer kedarko asa. Rabbi Yehuda says if you cut it down in the typical manner, it's prohibited. But magbiya yud tefachim v'kotzeitz. Oh, gomeim me'ama aretz. So Rabbi Yehuda says that that you're not allowed to cut it in the typical manner. That's considered sabbatical work. But what you can do is you can lift it up over 10 tefachim, meaning say you cut it above 10 tefachim, or you cut it from the ground and it's not considered work. Why? Meaning say from the ground it's bad, but above the ground it's going to be good for it. So why do we say you have to leave behind 3 tefachim? Any amount will be good for it to allow it to regenerate. So it's a contradiction. So it says gimel tefachim malila. So he says if it's 3 tefachim, that's for sure good for it. That'll allow it to regenerate. Me'am haaretz or me'im haaretz vaday kashila. If it's on the ground that you cut it, that's definitely bad for the sycamore. Mikam va'ilech lo makshua lo makshi kashila v'lav iluye me'alila. So from in between the one in the ground level and the 3 tefachim, it's not for sure good and it's not for sure bad. Garbage fees, when it comes to sabbatical, then therefore where you're not allowed to cut anything down that will help it. Abdina midei devade kashila. We say, okay, you can cut something that will certainly be bad for it, i.e. ground level. Gabi mekach or memkar, where it's a sale and you're selling to the person the right to take the wood. So therefore, avdina midei devade malila. We say, make sure that you leave behind something that's for sure good, because he's coming to get your tree. He has to bring the proof that that he's allowed to cut more. And so therefore you say, yeah, at least leave behind 3 tefachim. So then the Gemara asks another question. With the kolam ubarazim by palm trees and the cedar trees, chofer or masharish, you're allowed to dig all around it, because their roots will not regenerate. So the Gemara says, is it really the case that the cedar tree, its root will not regenerate? What does it do from the verse? That it says, Tzaddik katamar yifrach, a righteous person who will blossom like a palm tree, ke'erez ba'avanon yisken, will soar like a cedar in Lebanon, or be mighty like the cedars in Lebanon. Im nomar tomar, if you want to say that the tomar, why do we say, if you're saying the tzaddik is like the tomar, like the palm tree, lama nemar erez, why does it say a cedar? Im nomar erez, if it says a cedar, lama nemar tomar. Why does it have to cedar? Which is it, a cedar or a palm tree? So the Gemara says, "Yilu nemer eraz, v'lo nemer tamar." If it just said cedar and not a palm, Haisi Omer, I would say, Ma eraz enos aperos, ab tzadik enos aperos. I might have thought, chas v'shalom, that just like a cedar tree doesn't have fruits, so too the righteous one won't have fruits. L'kach nemer tamar. Therefore, it says a palm tree. Im nomer tamar, v'lo nemer eraz. If it said a palm and not a cedar, Haisi Omer, I might have thought, Ma tamar ein gizomach. Just like the palm, its tree does not regenerate. Af tzaddik in giza machlif. So too with tzaddik, his tree will not regenerate. It means say his offspring will not be righteous. Lakach nemar eras. So therefore, it says a cedar tree. So we see from here that a cedar tree, its palm regenerates. So its tree regenerates. So we see from here that cedar tree, its trunk regenerates. So why do we say it doesn't? So the Gemara says, there are different types of cedars. The other cedars, their trunk does regenerate. Like we have this Gemara in Tainus and in Rosh Hashanah and in Sukkah, we have it. The Gemara says there are 10 types of cedar trees. That's Rabbi Barafuna taught. Amri Beirav Yud Minei Arazmin. There are 10 types of cedars, as it says in Isaiah. Attain b'midbar eres shitim vadas veit shemen asim barava berosh titar uteashur yachdav. So these are the 10 different types of cedars. So, and the Gemara is going to explain what these 10 types of cedars are. Eres arsa. Eres is the cedar. Shita is the tornita. That's the pine. Hadas is the asa. That's the myrtle. Eitz shemen. That's the aparsima. That's the balsam tree. Berosh Barasi, that's the boxwood tree. Tidar Shaga, that's the fir tree. Ta'ashur Shurvina, I'm not sure what that one is. Kani Shiva Abu. So the Gemara says, but this is only 7. Ki Asar Avdimi Amar Usifu Alayan. They added on, and the Chachamim added on. Alonim, Amonim, Amugim. What are Alonim? That's the Putni, that's the elm. Amogim is the Bluti, that's the oak. Amugim, this is the Kasita. This is an interesting tree. Rashbam says this is a Ilan Shagodel B'Yam, the Yakar Harbe, the coral, a tree that grows in the sea and is worth a lot of money, which we call coral. And what is coral? I don't know if I don't think is coral a plant that grows in the tree? I don't know. So, some say Aronim, Armonim, Almogim. That some say that the ones that are added on are the Aronim, Armonim, and the Almogim. Aronim is the Ari, it's the laurel. Armonim is the dolby, the chestnut, and Almogim is the Kasita, the coral. All right, we'll stop the recording here. If anybody has any questions, I want to say to everybody on the Zoom,